You start as nothing more than a speck inside an egg, smaller than a grain of sand. Your mother dropped you here weeks ago, along with thousands of your siblings, in a cluster that looks like tiny pearls scattered across a leaf. She didn't stick around to see what happened next. By the time you're ready to hatch, she's already dead, her body drained and discarded somewhere in the underbrush. You don't know this yet, and you wouldn't care if you did. All that matters right now is breaking free. The shell around you is tough, but you've got sharp little claws designed for exactly this moment. You scratch and push, feeling the casing give way bit by bit. Around you, some of your siblings are doing the same thing. Others aren't moving at all. They never will. You don't have time to wonder why. The moment you crack through, instinct takes over. You're out and you're hungry. You're about the size of a poppy seed, translucent and fragile. Your 6 legs barely hold your weight as you climb onto the surface of the leaf. The world around you is massive and overwhelming, but you know exactly what you need to do. You need to find blood, and you need to find it fast. Without it, you'll die within days. Your siblings are already moving, some crawling up plant stems, others dropping to the ground. You don't follow them, you climb. Higher and higher you go, using every bit of strength in your tiny legs to reach the tip of a grass blade. This isn't random wandering. This is strategy. From up here, you can sense vibrations, heat, and most importantly, carbon dioxide. Every breath a potential host takes sends a signal through the air, and you're designed to detect it. You wait, legs outstretched, ready to grab onto anything that passes by. This is called questing, and it's your first real job as a tick. Hours pass, maybe days. You don't move from your position because moving wastes energy, and energy is the one thing you can't afford to lose. Other creatures walk by, beetles, ants, and spiders, but they're not what you need. You need something warm-blooded, something with the rich, nutritious blood that will fuel your transformation into the next stage of your life. Then you feel it, vibrations in the ground, the rhythmic thump of footsteps. Something big is coming. A mouse appears, nose twitching as it searches for seeds. It brushes against the grass blade you're perched on, and in that instant, you let go. Your legs lock onto its fur, and you don't let go. The mouse doesn't even notice. You're too small, too light. It keeps moving, carrying you along as you begin your journey across its body. This is your moment. You've found your first host. You don't just latch onto any spot. You need somewhere protected, somewhere the mouse can't easily scratch or groom you off. You crawl through the dense fur, feeling for the perfect location. Behind an ear, perfect. The skin here is thin, and the mouse's leg can't reach this angle effectively. You press your mouth parts against the warm skin and begin to cut. Your feeding apparatus isn't like a mosquito's needle. It's more like a tiny saw, designed to slice through skin and create a feeding pool. Blood starts to flow, but you don't just suck it up. You cement yourself in place with a glue-like substance that hardens around your mouth parts. Now you're truly attached, locked onto your host like a living anchor. The mouse feels the irritation and scratches at the spot, but you're already too well secured to be dislodged. You settle in for what will be the most important meal of your life. For the next 3 to 5 days, you do nothing but feed. Your body swells as blood fills your tiny frame, transforming you from a translucent speck into a dark, engorged creature many times your original size. The mouse goes about its daily business, foraging, hiding from predators, sleeping, while you continue your relentless feeding. You're not just taking blood, you're taking everything you need to grow, to molt, to become something bigger and more capable. The mouse tries to remove you several times, scratching and rubbing against rough surfaces, but your cement hold is too strong. Eventually, it gives up, accepting your presence as just another part of life in the wild. You barely notice its efforts anyway. All your focus is on the steady flow of warm blood filling your body, preparing you for the transformation that's coming. When you've had enough, when your body can't hold anymore, you finally let go. Your mouth parts retract, breaking the cement seal, and you drop off your host. The mouse scurries away, probably relieved to be free of you, though it's now carrying something far more dangerous than your bite wounds. You've left behind more than just a small puncture. You've potentially transmitted diseases that were passed down from your mother, microscopic passengers that could change your host's life forever. But that's not your problem anymore. You tumble through the air and land in the leaf litter below, your body so swollen with blood that you can barely move. You're vulnerable now, slow and obvious to any predator that might spot you. You need to find shelter, and you need to find it quickly. Using what little mobility you have left, you crawl under a fallen log, burying yourself in the damp soil and debris. Here, hidden from the world above, you begin the process that will define the rest of your existence. Your body starts to change, using all that blood you consumed to fuel a complete reconstruction. Your outer shell hardens and splits, and you begin to shed your old skin. This is your first molt, and it's exhausting work. Your legs fold against your body as new ones form beneath the old ones. Your mouth parts reshape themselves, becoming more sophisticated and more dangerous. Days pass in this state of transformation. You're completely helpless, unable to move or defend yourself. If a predator found you now, it would be over before you could even try to escape. But the log above protects you, and the soil around you provides the humidity your molting body needs. Slowly, piece by piece, you emerge from your old shell as a completely different creature. You're a nymph now, 8-legged instead of 6, and significantly larger than you were before. Your body is more robust, your legs stronger, your mouth parts more developed. You look less like a speck of dust and more like a proper tick, though you're still far from your final form. Most importantly, you're hungry again. That massive blood meal that got you through your molt is completely used up, and your body is already demanding more. You dig your way out of the soil and begin the process all over again. Back to questing, back to waiting on the tips of grass blades and low bushes, sensing for the carbon dioxide and vibrations that signal a potential host. But this time, you're not limited to small creatures like mice. Your larger size and stronger legs can handle bigger hosts, rabbits, squirrels, maybe even a young deer if you're lucky enough to encounter one. The waiting is harder now because you're bigger and more obvious to potential predators. Birds that wouldn't have noticed you as a larva might spot you now and snatch you up for an easy meal. Spiders see you as prey worth pursuing. Even other ticks might try to push you off your perch to claim the best questing spots for themselves. You have to be more careful, more strategic about when and where you position yourself. After several days of waiting, another opportunity presents itself. This time, it's a squirrel, bushy tail twitching as it searches for buried nuts. The moment it brushes against your grass blade, you're on it, legs gripping tight to its fur as it bounds away through the trees. The ride is rougher this time. Squirrels are much more active than mice, but you hold on, making your way through the dense fur to find the perfect feeding spot. You choose a location along the squirrel's back where its flexibility is limited and your presence will be harder to detect. Once again, you cut through the skin and cement yourself in place, settling in for another multi-day feeding session. This blood meal is even more substantial than your first, and your body responds by swelling to accommodate the massive intake. The squirrel notices you more than the mouse did, scratching and rolling on the ground in an attempt to dislodge you, but your hold is secure. As you feed, you're not just growing, you're also potentially picking up new pathogens from your host. Ticks are living disease reservoirs, capable of harboring and transmitting dozens of different bacteria, viruses, and parasites. Each host you feed on adds to your collection, turning you into a walking biological weapon that will threaten every future host you encounter. It's not malicious, it's just biology. You're perfectly adapted to be a vector for disease, and you're very, very good at your job. When the second feeding is complete, you drop off again, even more engorged than before. This time, you seek shelter under a pile of decomposing leaves, where the humidity is high and the temperature stable. Your second molt begins, and it's even more dramatic than the first. Your entire body restructures itself, preparing for the final stage of your development. You emerge as an adult tick, fully formed and ready for the most important phase of your life. You're larger, more durable, and equipped with reproductive organs that will define your ultimate purpose. If you're male, your body is compact and streamlined, built for mobility and mating. If you're female, you're larger and more robust, designed to carry and lay thousands of eggs. Either way, you're now a mature predator, capable of taking on hosts as large as deer, dogs, or even humans. Your adult quest for blood is different from your previous feeding sessions. This isn't just about survival and growth anymore. It's about reproduction. Every drop of blood you consume as an adult will be converted into eggs if you're female, or used to fuel your search for mates if you're male. The stakes are higher, and your behavior becomes more aggressive and determined. You position yourself on taller vegetation now, sometimes climbing as high as 3 feet off the ground. From this elevated position, you can intercept larger hosts that wouldn't come into contact with the low grass blades you used as a nymph. Your sensory organs are more developed, capable of detecting hosts from greater distances and with more precision. The wait for your final host begins, and it could last months. Unlike your previous stages, where you had to feed relatively quickly or die, adult ticks can survive for extended periods without blood. Your body is built for patience, for waiting out long stretches between hosts while maintaining the energy needed to quest and eventually reproduce. But patience doesn't mean inactivity. You're constantly monitoring your environment, tracking the movements of potential hosts, adjusting your position to maximize your chances of making contact. Every vibration in the ground, every shift in carbon dioxide levels, every change in temperature could signal an approaching opportunity. You're a living sensor array, perfectly tuned to detect the presence of warm-blooded creatures. When the opportunity finally comes, it's bigger than anything you've encountered before. A deer steps into the clearing, its hooves creating vibrations that travel up through the vegetation to your waiting legs. This is what you've been preparing for, a host large enough to provide the massive blood meal you need to complete your life cycle. As the deer brushes past the shrub you're perched on, you don't hesitate. Your legs lock onto its coarse fur, and suddenly you're traveling through a forest of hair, thicker and denser than anything you've navigated before. The deer's skin is tougher than the mouse or squirrel, but your adult mouth parts are designed for exactly this challenge. You work your way through the fur, searching for the perfect spot, somewhere protected but with good blood flow. The base of the neck, just behind the ear, offers everything you need. The deer can't reach this spot easily, and the blood vessels here run close to the surface. You begin the familiar process of cutting through skin, but this time it takes longer. The deer's hide is thick and resistant, requiring patience and persistence. Once you've established your feeding site and cemented yourself in place, the real work begins. This isn't the quick feeding session of your youth. This is a marathon that will last over a week. Your body begins to swell, but the transformation this time is dramatic beyond anything you've experienced. If you're female, your abdomen expands like a balloon, growing from the size of a small bead to something resembling a gray grape. The blood you're consuming isn't just fuel now, it's the raw material for thousands of future offspring. The deer notices your presence more acutely than your previous hosts did. It rubs against trees, rolls on the ground, and scratches with its hooves, trying to dislodge the irritating passenger. But you're locked in place. Your cement holds stronger than ever, your feeding apparatus buried deep in the tissue. The deer's attempts to remove you become part of the background noise of your feeding, no more concerning than the wind in the trees. As days pass, your body continues its relentless expansion. If you're male, you're also searching for something else during this feeding period, females to mate with. Male ticks are opportunistic, seeking out females who are already attached and feeding. When you find one, you climb onto her back and begin the mating process while she continues to feed. It's efficient and practical, ensuring that reproduction happens at the optimal time when females are preparing to lay eggs. The deer tries everything to rid itself of you. It visits mineral licks where other deer congregate, perhaps hoping that grooming from companions will help remove the unwanted passengers. It wades through streams, rolls in dust, and rubs against every rough surface it can find. None of it works. You and others like you remain firmly attached, slowly draining the deer's blood while potentially introducing a cocktail of diseases that could affect its health for the rest of its life. During your extended feeding, you're not just taking blood, you're injecting saliva that contains anticoagulants to keep the blood flowing, anesthetics to numb the bite site, and immune suppressors to prevent your host's body from rejecting you. This saliva is also the primary route through which you transmit diseases. Bacteria, viruses, and other pathogens flow from your salivary glands into your host's bloodstream, establishing infections that may not manifest symptoms for weeks or months. Your feeding creates a wound that won't heal properly while you're attached. The constant irritation and the chemicals in your saliva prevent normal clotting and tissue repair. The bite site becomes inflamed and sometimes infected, creating additional health problems for your host beyond any diseases you might transmit. The deer's immune system tries to respond, but your saliva is specifically designed to subvert these natural defenses. Other creatures take notice of your presence. Birds that specialize in removing parasites from large mammals sometimes succeed in plucking off ticks, but you're well positioned and firmly attached. Small mammals and insects that might normally be prey for the deer instead benefit from its distraction and weakened state. You're part of a complex ecological web, your presence affecting not just your immediate host, but the entire ecosystem around it. Weather becomes a factor during your extended feeding period. Rain doesn't dislodge you, but it affects the deer's behavior and your own comfort. Hot sun can make the deer seek shade, changing your environment and potentially affecting your feeding efficiency. Cold snaps might slow your metabolism, extending the time needed to complete your blood meal. You're adapted to handle these variations, but they add complexity to what should be a straightforward feeding process. As your feeding nears completion, your body reaches its maximum capacity. If you're female, you're now hundreds of times heavier than when you first attached. your abdomen stretched to accommodate the massive blood meal that will fuel egg production. Your legs can barely support your swollen body, and your mobility is severely compromised. This vulnerability is the price you pay for reproductive success. The more blood you consume, the more eggs you'll be able to produce, but the more helpless you become. The deer's behavior changes as it carries multiple engorged ticks. Its movements become more labored, partly from blood loss and partly from the constant irritation of numerous bite sites. It spends more time grooming and less time feeding, affecting its own nutrition and energy levels. If you're carrying diseases, the symptoms might be starting to manifest: fever, joint pain, neurological symptoms that will plague the deer for weeks or months to come. When you finally detach, it's not a gradual process. Your cement hold releases all at once, and you drop heavily to the ground below. Your engorged body hits the leaf litter with an audible thud, and for a moment, you're completely helpless. Your legs wave uselessly in the air as you struggle to right yourself, your swollen abdomen making normal movement impossible. This is the most dangerous moment of your adult life. You're slow, obvious, and packed with the blood that represents your entire reproductive investment. Predators know to watch for dropping ticks. Birds patrol areas where deer frequently travel, snatching up the engorged parasites as easy meals. Ground beetles and other insects also prey on helpless ticks, turning the tables on these normally formidable predators. You must find shelter quickly, but your mobility is so compromised that even the shortest journey becomes an epic struggle. Using every bit of strength you can muster, you crawl toward the nearest cover, a fallen log, a pile of leaves, anything that will hide your swollen form from the eyes of predators. The journey that would have taken seconds in your questing days now takes hours. Each movement is labored and exhausting, your legs barely able to coordinate well enough to produce forward motion. You're racing against time and the attention of creatures that see you as an easy target. Once you find adequate shelter, your body begins the process that will define your legacy. If you're male, your job is essentially complete. You've fed, you've mated, and your genetic contribution to the next generation is assured. Your swollen body will gradually return to normal size as you digest your blood meal, but your lifespan is nearing its end. Males rarely survive much longer after their final feeding, their purpose fulfilled. If you're female, however, your most important work is just beginning. Hidden beneath your chosen shelter, your body starts converting the massive blood meal into eggs. This process takes weeks, during which you remain vulnerable and immobile. Your abdomen continues to swell as thousands of eggs develop inside you, each one a potential future tick carrying your genetic material and any pathogens you've accumulated during your lifetime. The egg development process is exhausting and irreversible. Your body cannibalizes its own tissues to provide nutrients for the developing eggs, breaking down muscles and organs that are no longer essential for survival. You're essentially sacrificing yourself for your offspring, your entire adult life building toward this single moment of reproductive success. Every drop of blood you consumed, every risk you took, every predator you avoided has led to this final act. Your chosen shelter becomes increasingly important as you grow weaker and more vulnerable. The humidity levels must be just right to prevent your eggs from drying out, but not so high that fungal infections take hold. The temperature needs to remain stable to ensure proper development. The location must be protected from predators, but accessible enough that your future offspring can disperse effectively when they hatch. As the weeks pass, your body continues its transformation from predator to egg-laying machine. Your legs become less functional, your sensory organs less acute. You're no longer the efficient hunter that climbed vegetation and detected hosts from impressive distances. You're now entirely focused on the biological imperative of reproduction. Your body committed to creating the next generation of ticks that will continue your species' ancient cycle of survival and reproduction. The diseases you've collected throughout your lifetime become part of your legacy. Many pathogens can pass from mother to offspring, ensuring that newly hatched ticks are already equipped with the biological weapons they'll need to establish infections in their future hosts. This vertical transmission of disease organisms is one of the reasons ticks are such effective vectors. They don't just acquire pathogens during their lifetime, they inherit them from birth. Your egg-laying process, when it finally begins, is both climactic and anticlimactic. After weeks of preparation, the eggs emerge in clusters, thousands of tiny spheres that represent your genetic immortality. Each egg contains not just your DNA, but also the accumulated pathogens of every host you've fed upon. You're not just reproducing, you're creating an army of disease vectors that will spread across the landscape, seeking new hosts and continuing the ancient cycle of parasitism that has made ticks one of the most successful groups of arthropods on Earth. The process drains everything from you. Each egg that emerges takes a piece of your life force with it, your body growing smaller and weaker as your reproductive duty nears completion. You lay them in clusters, sticky masses that adhere to the debris around your shelter. The eggs are your masterpiece and your death sentence, each one perfectly formed and ready to wait out whatever weather comes next. Your body shrivels as the last eggs are deposited. What was once a grape-sized mass of blood and tissue becomes a deflated husk, barely recognizable as the predator that once terrorized small mammals. Your legs curl inward, your mouth parts retract, and your sensory organs shut down one by one. You've given everything to ensure the next generation has the best possible start, and now there's nothing left to give. But your offspring won't hatch immediately. They'll wait through winter if necessary, or through dry spells that would kill active ticks. The eggs you've laid are designed for patience, capable of surviving months of harsh conditions, while the tiny larvae inside develop and prepare for their own emergence. They carry your genetic code and your accumulated diseases, ready to begin the cycle anew when conditions are right. When spring arrives, or when moisture and temperature align perfectly, the eggs begin to crack. Thousands of your offspring emerge simultaneously, creating a living carpet of hungry larvae. They're smaller than you were at the same stage, but they carry advantages you didn't have. The diseases you collected and passed down give them immediate biological weapons to use against their hosts. Some carry Lyme disease bacteria, others Rocky Mountain spotted fever, still others carry viruses and parasites that won't be identified by science for decades to come. Your larvae face the same challenges you did, finding hosts, avoiding predators, surviving long enough to feed and molt. But they do so in greater numbers, a strategy that ensures at least some will survive, even if most perish. They climb the same grass blades you once used, position themselves with the same patient determination, and wait for the vibrations that signal an approaching host. The mice they encounter might be descendants of the mouse you fed on as a larva. The cycle continues with ruthless efficiency, each generation building on the successes and failures of the previous one. Your genetic material spreads through the population, your accumulated pathogens find new hosts, and your contribution to the species' survival becomes part of the endless dance between parasite and host. Some of your offspring will be more successful than others. A few might find larger hosts earlier in their development, growing faster and stronger than their siblings. Others will struggle with the same challenges you faced, spending weeks questing without success, slowly starving as their energy reserves dwindle. The forest doesn't care about individual success, only the species' continuation matters. Your larvae that do find hosts begin their own feeding cycles. They latch onto field mice, shrews, small birds, anything warm-blooded that wanders too close to their questing positions. Their feeding creates new puncture wounds, new opportunities for disease transmission, new irritation for hosts that already struggle with the challenges of survival in the wild. Each successful feeding is a victory for your genetic legacy and a potential disaster for the host species. The diseases your offspring carry begin spreading through the local ecosystem. A mouse infected by one of your larvae carries Lyme disease bacteria to its burrow, where fleas and other parasites might pick up the infection and spread it further. A bird infected with one of your viruses flies miles before showing symptoms, potentially introducing your pathogens to entirely new areas. Your biological legacy extends far beyond your own feeding and reproduction. Predators that specialize in eating ticks discover the bounty your offspring represent. Opossums, with their lower body temperatures that kill many tick-borne diseases, consume hundreds of your larvae without suffering any ill effects. Guinea fowl pick them off vegetation with mechanical efficiency. Even some spiders and beetles make careers out of hunting your kind, turning your offspring into their own reproductive fuel. But enough survive to continue the cycle. Your successful offspring grow and molt, becoming nymphs with their own hunting territories and feeding requirements. They're more sophisticated than they were as larvae, capable of taking on larger hosts and surviving longer between meals. Some climb higher vegetation, positioning themselves to intercept rabbits, squirrels, and juvenile deer. Others remain close to the ground, targeting the small mammals that form the base of the forest food web. The nymphs face new challenges as they grow larger and more obvious. Birds that wouldn't notice a larva can easily spot a nymph and snatch it up for a protein-rich meal. The nymphs must be more strategic, choosing their questing positions carefully and timing their movements to avoid detection. They develop the same patience you once had, waiting motionless for hours or days until the perfect host presents itself. Your successful nymphs eventually find hosts and complete their second blood meals. They drop off, engorged and vulnerable, seeking shelter for their final molt into adulthood. This transformation turns them into the apex predators of the tick world, capable of taking on the largest hosts available in their ecosystem. They emerge as adults with the same drives that motivated you, the need to feed and reproduce, to continue the species' endless cycle of parasitism. The adults that carry your genes spread across the landscape, some traveling on migrating birds, others hitchhiking on deer that range across multiple territories. Your genetic influence expands beyond the small patch of forest where you lived and died, reaching into new ecosystems and encountering new host species. Some of your descendants might even encounter humans, those large, warm-blooded creatures that have become increasingly common in tick habitats. Humans represent both opportunity and danger for your offspring. They're large, blood-rich hosts that can provide massive meals, but they're also aware of tick-borne diseases and actively try to prevent tick attachment. They use repellents, perform tick checks, and remove attached ticks with tools designed specifically for that purpose. Some humans even alter their landscapes to reduce tick populations, cutting grass short and removing leaf litter where ticks might shelter. But humans also create opportunities. Their pets, dogs and cats that spend time outdoors, become mobile tick platforms, carrying your offspring into homes and neighborhoods where they might never have ventured naturally. Human recreational activities bring them into tick habitats, wearing minimal protective clothing, providing easy access to blood meals. Even human efforts to help wildlife, like maintaining bird feeders and deer friendly gardens, can concentrate hosts in areas where ticks are waiting. The diseases your offspring carry into human populations create ripple effects you could never have anticipated. A single infected tick can trigger weeks of antibiotics, multiple doctor visits, and sometimes chronic health conditions that last for years. Entire research industries develop around understanding and treating the diseases you helped spread. Public health campaigns warn people about tick-borne illnesses, changing human behavior in ways that affect the entire ecosystem. Your genetic legacy adapts to these human interventions. Ticks that are better at avoiding detection survive and reproduce more successfully. Those that can tolerate common repellents pass on their resistance genes. Even the diseases your offspring carry evolve, some becoming more virulent to ensure transmission, others becoming more subtle to avoid triggering strong immune responses that might kill their tick vectors. Climate change affects your descendants in ways you never experienced. Warmer temperatures allow ticks to remain active longer each year, extending their feeding and questing seasons. Changing precipitation patterns affect the humidity levels that determine where ticks can successfully molt and lay eggs. Some of your offspring find themselves in habitats that were once too cold or too dry to support tick populations, expanding the species' range into new territories. The forests where your descendants live continue to change. Invasive plant species alter the understory vegetation where ticks quest for hosts. Development fragments habitats, creating edge environments where ticks and hosts interact more frequently. Even well-intentioned conservation efforts sometimes create conditions that favor tick population growth, concentrating hosts in protected areas where tick numbers can explode. Your offspring develop new hunting strategies as they encounter novel challenges. Some learn to quest from artificial surfaces, garden furniture, playground equipment, landscaping features that humans have introduced into their environments. Others adapt their host preferences, targeting urban-adapted wildlife like raccoons, possums, and urban deer that have learned to thrive alongside human development. The cycle you began continues with mechanical precision. Your genes flow through generations of ticks, each one carrying forward the biological programming that made you successful. They quest with the same patient determination, feed with the same ruthless efficiency, and reproduce with the same biological imperative that drove your entire existence. Your individual life was brief and focused, but your genetic contribution to the species becomes immortal. Some of your descendants will be more successful than you were, finding larger hosts or surviving longer between meals. Others will face challenges you never encountered, new predators, novel diseases, changing climates that test the limits of tick adaptability. But the species as a whole grows stronger through this constant testing, each generation building on the accumulated survival strategies of all previous generations. The diseases you helped spread continue to evolve alongside your descendants. Some pathogens develop new transmission strategies. Others become resistant to treatments that once eliminated them easily. The biological warfare between tick-borne diseases and host immune systems creates an arms race that has been running for millions of years and shows no signs of ending. Your offspring encounter hosts you never could have imagined. Exotic pets kept by humans, zoo animals in artificial habitats, even laboratory animals maintained for research purposes. Each new host species represents a potential new reservoir for the diseases your kind carries, creating opportunities for pathogens to jump between species and evolve in unexpected directions. The success of your reproductive strategy becomes evident in the sheer numbers of your descendants. What started as thousands of eggs laid beneath a single log becomes millions of ticks spread across entire continents. Each carries a fragment of your genetic code, a piece of your biological legacy that connects them to the long evolutionary history of tick success. Your impact on the ecosystem extends far beyond the immediate effects of blood feeding. The diseases you helped spread affect host behavior, making some animals less successful at reproduction or survival. This creates subtle selection pressures that shape the evolution of host species, driving the development of better immune systems or behavioral strategies for avoiding tick attachment. The relationship between your descendants and their hosts continues to evolve in an endless biological arms race. Hosts develop better grooming behaviors, stronger immune responses, and chemical defenses against tick attachment. Your offspring counter with improved attachment mechanisms, more sophisticated immune suppression strategies, and better camouflage to avoid detection during questing. Human medicine advances in response to the diseases your kind carries, developing new diagnostic tests, more effective treatments, and even vaccines against some tick-borne illnesses. But your descendants adapt to these interventions, sometimes developing resistance to treatments or finding new ways to evade diagnostic detection. The battle between human medicine and tick-borne disease represents just one front in the larger war between parasites and hosts. Your biological legacy becomes part of the fundamental ecology of every habitat where ticks are found. The nutrients your offspring extract from their hosts and eventually return to the soil through their own deaths, and waste products become part of the forest's nutrient cycling. Even the irritation and stress they cause to their hosts plays a role in regulating animal populations and behavior patterns. The story of your life, brief, focused, and ultimately successful, repeats itself countless times through your descendants. Each individual tick lives the same basic narrative of hatching, questing, feeding, molting, and reproducing. But collectively, they represent one of the most successful parasitic strategies ever evolved, a biological system so effective that it has persisted virtually unchanged for millions of years. Your death beneath that pile of leaves after laying your final clutch of eggs was not an ending, but a transformation. Your body became nutrients for the soil organisms that would eventually feed the plants your offspring would use for questing. Your genes became the blueprint for thousands of future ticks. Your accumulated pathogens became the biological weapons that would ensure your descendants' success in their endless war against host immune systems. The patch of forest where you lived and died continues to support new generations of ticks, each one carrying forward the evolutionary strategies that made your life possible. The cycle continues with the same patient determination that characterized your own existence, each tick playing its role in a biological drama that has been unfolding since long before humans walked the earth and will continue long after they're gone. The forest where your eggs lie waiting doesn't stay the same. Seasons shift, bringing changes that test the patience built into your offspring's design. Winter arrives with its killing frost, temperatures that would destroy active ticks in hours, but your eggs endure, their tough shells protecting the developing larvae inside from conditions that claim most other insects. Snow piles on top of the leaf litter where they rest, creating an insulating blanket that maintains the stable conditions they need. Spring's arrival triggers a response coded into their genetic programming. As soil temperatures rise and humidity increases, The eggs begin their final transformation. Inside each shell, a larva has been slowly developing through the cold months, using stored nutrients to build the body parts it will need for its first hunt. When conditions align perfectly, the hatching begins. It's not a gradual process. Thousands of your offspring emerge within days of each other, creating a carpet of hungry larvae covering the forest floor. They're smaller than you were at the same stage, but they carry advantages you lacked. The diseases you accumulated and passed down give them immediate biological weapons. Some harbor Lyme disease bacteria in their guts, others carry Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and still others transport viruses that won't be identified by science for decades. Your larvae don't waste time getting oriented. Within hours of hatching, they begin their first quest, climbing onto low vegetation with the same patient determination that defined your own early life. They position themselves on grass blades and small shrubs, legs extended, waiting for the vibrations that signal an approaching host. Most will die without ever feeding, but enough will succeed to continue your genetic line. The forest ecosystem they emerge into has adapted to expect them. Predators that specialize in eating ticks patrol the areas where deer commonly travel, knowing that spring brings a bounty of easy meals. Ground beetles scuttle through the leaf litter, searching for the slow-moving larvae. Birds that have learned to associate tick activity with certain weather patterns arrive right on schedule, their beaks perfectly designed for plucking parasites from vegetation. But your offspring have numbers on their side. Even if 90% perish, the survivors represent thousands of potential ticks. They spread across the landscape, each one carrying your genetic code and your accumulated pathogens into new territory. Some climb higher than others, positioning themselves to intercept larger hosts. Others remain close to the ground, targeting the small mammals that form the foundation of the forest food web. The mice they encounter might be descendants of creatures you once fed upon. These hosts have their own evolutionary history of dealing with ticks, grooming behaviors refined over generations, immune responses honed by constant exposure to tick-borne diseases. But your larvae are equally refined, their attachment mechanisms perfected through millions of years of parasitic success. When one of your offspring successfully latches onto a field mouse, the familiar cycle begins anew. The larva cuts through skin with mouth parts inherited from you, cements itself in place with the same biological glue that once secured your own feeding, and begins the multi-day process of blood consumption that will fuel its growth into a nymph. The mouse carries it through its daily routines, unaware that it's transporting not just a parasite, but a disease vector carrying your biological legacy. The feeding creates more than just a wound. Your offspring's saliva contains the same cocktail of chemicals you once produced: anticoagulants to keep blood flowing, anesthetics to prevent detection, immune suppressors to overcome host defenses. But it also contains something more dangerous: the bacteria you collected during your own feeding sessions, now passed down to a new generation of disease vectors. As your larval offspring feeds and grows, it faces the same vulnerability you once experienced. The engorged body becomes slow and obvious, an easy target for any predator that spots it. When it finally drops off its host, swollen with blood, it must find shelter quickly before birds or beetles discover its helpless form. The successful ones crawl under logs, bury themselves in leaf litter, and begin the molting process that will transform them into nymphs. The transformation uses every bit of the blood they consumed, breaking it down and rebuilding their bodies into more sophisticated hunting machines. 8 legs instead of 6, stronger mouth parts, better sensory organs, for detecting hosts from greater distances. They emerge from their molts as recognizable ticks, small but dangerous, ready to take on larger prey than their larval forms could handle. Your nymphal descendants face a changed landscape. Climate shifts have altered the timing of host activity, extending some seasons and shortening others. New diseases have appeared, carried by migrating birds or introduced through human activity. Urban development has fragmented the forest, creating edge habitats where ticks and hosts interact in different patterns than they did during your lifetime. But they adapt with the same flexibility that characterizes all successful parasites. Some adjust their questing behavior to match new host movement patterns. Others develop tolerance for environmental conditions that would have been lethal to previous generations. The most successful pass these adaptations onto their own offspring, gradually shifting the species toward better survival in a changing world. The diseases they carry continue to evolve alongside them. Bacteria that were relatively benign in your time develop new virulence factors, becoming more effective at establishing infections in host tissues. Viruses adapt to new host species, jumping between mammals and birds with increasing efficiency. Your nymphal descendants become unwitting laboratories for pathogen evolution, their guts serving as mixing chambers where different disease organisms can exchange genetic material. Human encounters with your descendants increase as development pushes deeper into natural habitats. Suburban homes with large yards create interfaces between human activity and tick territory. Children playing in leaf piles, adults gardening, pets running through tall grass, all become potential hosts for ticks carrying diseases that trace their lineage back to your own feeding sessions. The medical consequences ripple through human communities in ways you could never have anticipated. Emergency rooms see more cases of tick-borne illness, some presenting as mysterious fevers and rashes that challenge diagnostic capabilities. Research laboratories study the genetic sequences of bacteria extracted from ticks descended from your offspring, trying to understand how these pathogens evolved their current characteristics. Your nymphal descendants that successfully feed and molt emerge as adult ticks equipped for the final phase of their lives. They're larger and more capable than you were at the same stage, benefiting from generations of genetic refinement. Their sensory organs can detect hosts from greater distances, their attachment mechanisms are more secure, and their disease transmission capabilities are more sophisticated. The adult males among your descendants face the same challenge you once did, finding females and mating before their brief adult lives end. They climb tall vegetation, sometimes reaching heights of 4 feet or more, positioning themselves to intercept the largest available hosts. Their success depends not just on finding blood meals, but on locating females who are also feeding, timing their mating attempts for maximum reproductive success. The females carry the greater burden of continuing your genetic line. They must find hosts large enough to provide the massive blood meals necessary for egg production, survive the extended feeding period while remaining attached and vulnerable, and then successfully lay thousands of eggs in suitable locations. Each step represents a potential failure point that could end your genetic lineage in that particular branch. But the sheer numbers work in your favor. With thousands of descendants spreading across the landscape, some inevitably succeed despite the odds against any individual tick. The successful females find deer, dogs, or even human hosts capable of providing the blood volume they need. They attach and feed for over a week, their bodies swelling to hundreds of times their original size as they prepare for egg laying. The deer they feed upon carry multiple ticks, sometimes dozens of your descendants attached simultaneously. The cumulative effect weakens the host, reducing its ability to flee from predators or survive harsh weather. Some deer develop chronic health problems from the diseases your offspring transmit, neurological symptoms that affect their coordination and decision making abilities. Your female descendants eventually drop off their hosts, engorged beyond recognition, and seek shelter for the egg laying process that will complete their life cycle. They choose locations similar to the one where you once laid your own eggs, protected spots with stable humidity and temperature, places where developing eggs can survive the months of waiting that lie ahead. The egg laying process drains them completely, just as it did you. Each egg represents a portion of their life force, containing not just genetic material, but also the pathogens they've accumulated during their feeding. The eggs cluster in masses, sticky and resilient, designed to wait out whatever environmental challenges come next. Your genetic material spreads through these new generations, like ripples in a pond, each successful reproduction creating more carriers of your biological legacy. The diseases you collected during your lifetime become part of a vast pathogen reservoir maintained by tick populations and transmitted to new hosts with mechanical efficiency. Some of your descendants encounter hosts you never could have imagined. Exotic animals kept as pets, zoo creatures in artificial habitats, even laboratory animals maintained for research purposes. Each new host species represents a potential evolutionary opportunity for both ticks and the diseases they carry. The success of your reproductive strategy becomes evident in the growing tick populations that spread across continents. What began as your single clutch of eggs has multiplied exponentially, creating millions of ticks that carry fragments of your genetic code. Each one continues the same basic life pattern: hatching, questing, feeding, molting, reproducing. But collectively, they represent one of evolution's most successful parasitic strategies. The relationship between your descendants and their hosts continues to evolve in an endless biological arms race. Hosts develop better immune responses, more effective grooming behaviors, and chemical defenses against tick attachment. Your offspring counter with improved camouflage, more sophisticated immune suppression, and better attachment mechanisms. Human medicine advances in response to the diseases your lineage carries, developing new diagnostic tests and more effective treatments. But evolution doesn't pause for human convenience. Some of your descendants develop resistance to common treatments. Others find new ways to evade diagnostic detection, and the pathogens they carry continue to evolve new strategies for surviving in host tissues. The forests, fields, and suburban landscapes where your descendants live become battlegrounds in this ancient war between parasites and hosts. Every blade of grass potentially holds a questing tick. Every walk through tall vegetation becomes a calculated risk. Every pet that ventures outdoors returns as a potential disease vector. Your biological legacy extends far beyond the immediate effects of blood feeding. The diseases your descendants spread affect host behavior patterns, making some animals less successful at reproduction or survival. This creates subtle selection pressures that shape the evolution of entire ecosystems, driving the development of better immune systems and anti-parasite behaviors across multiple species. The nutrients your offspring extract from their hosts and eventually return to the soil through their own deaths become part of the forest's natural cycling systems. Even the stress and irritation they cause to their hosts plays a role in regulating animal populations and behavior patterns, contributing to the complex web of interactions that defines healthy ecosystems. Climate change affects your descendants in ways you never experienced. Warmer temperatures extend their active seasons, allowing more generations to complete their life cycles each year. Changing precipitation patterns affect the humidity levels that determine where ticks can successfully molt and reproduce. Some of your offspring find themselves in habitats that were once too cold or too dry to support tick populations. The story of your life, brief, focused, and ultimately successful, repeats itself through countless descendants, each one playing out the same basic narrative of survival and reproduction. But the collective impact grows with each generation, creating ever expanding populations of disease vectors that affect every ecosystem where they establish themselves. Your death beneath that pile of leaves, after laying your final clutch of eggs, was indeed a transformation rather than an ending. Your body became nutrients for the soil organisms that feed the plants your offspring use for questing. Your genes became the blueprint for thousands of future ticks. Your accumulated pathogens became biological weapons, ensuring your descendants' success in their endless war against host immune systems. The patch of forest where you completed your life cycle continues to support new generations of ticks, each one carrying forward the evolutionary strategies that made your existence possible. The cycle continues with the same patient determination that characterized your own life, each tick playing its role in a biological drama that has been unfolding since long before humans evolved and will continue long after they're gone. Your individual story was one of countless billions, but your genetic contribution to the species becomes part of something larger, a living system so successful at parasitism that it has remained virtually unchanged for millions of years. In the end, your brief life of questing, feeding, and reproducing achieved exactly what evolution designed it to achieve: the continuation of your kind and the spread of your genetic legacy across the landscape. The ticks that quest on vegetation today, waiting with infinite patience for their next host, carry within them the accumulated wisdom of millions of years of parasitic success. Some of them trace their lineage directly back to you, inheriting not just your genes, but your biological legacy of disease transmission and survival strategies. Your life was complete the moment you laid those eggs, but your story continues with every tick that successfully feeds, every host that becomes infected, and every new generation that emerges to continue the ancient cycle of parasitic survival. The forest where your story played out continues its eternal rhythms, but the landscape is changing in ways that affect every tick that calls it home. Development creeps closer each year, suburban neighborhoods pushing against the wild edges where you once quested. The deer paths you relied on now intersect with hiking trails and dog walking routes, creating new opportunities and new dangers for your descendants. Your offspring encounter humans more frequently than you ever did. These large, warm-blooded creatures represent the ultimate feeding opportunity, massive blood meals that can sustain a tick through multiple life stages. But humans are also the most dangerous hosts, equipped with knowledge about tick-borne diseases and tools specifically designed to remove attached parasites. When one of your descendant nymphs successfully latches onto a human host, the experience is unlike anything in tick evolutionary history. The human might not notice the attachment initially, allowing the tick to begin feeding normally. But humans perform tick checks, examining their skin systematically after spending time outdoors. They use mirrors to inspect hard-to-see areas, tweezers to remove attached ticks, and magnifying glasses to spot the smallest parasites. If discovered and removed within the first day or two, your descendant might not have time to transmit the diseases it carries, but if it remains undetected for longer periods, the familiar process of pathogen transmission begins. Bacteria flow from the tick's salivary glands into the human bloodstream, establishing infections that might not show symptoms for weeks. The human medical response to tick-borne illness represents a level of host sophistication that no other creature can match. Blood tests identify specific pathogens, antibiotics target bacterial infections, and detailed medical records track the progression of symptoms. Some humans develop chronic conditions from the diseases your lineage carries, suffering joint pain, neurological symptoms, and fatigue that persists for years. But humans also fight back in ways that reshape the entire tick ecosystem. They modify their landscapes, cutting grass short and removing leaf litter where ticks shelter. They treat their pets with chemicals that kill attached ticks, use repellents that make their skin uninhabitable, and wear protective clothing that prevents tick access to feeding sites. Your descendants adapt to these interventions with the same evolutionary flexibility that has always characterized tick success. Some develop tolerance for common repellents, others become better at avoiding detection during the vulnerable questing phase. The most successful pass these adaptations to their offspring, gradually shifting tick populations toward better survival in human-modified environments. The diseases your offspring carry also evolve in response to human medical interventions. Bacteria that were once easily eliminated by standard antibiotic treatments develop resistance mechanisms requiring stronger or longer courses of medication. Some pathogens become better at hiding from immune system detection, establishing persistent infections that are difficult to diagnose and treat. Your genetic legacy spreads beyond the immediate forest ecosystem as infected hosts travel vast distances. Migrating birds carry your descendants across continents, introducing tick populations to new habitats thousands of miles from where you lived and died. Some of these long-distance travelers establish breeding populations in previously tick-free areas, expanding the species' range into territories that were once safe havens for potential hosts. The global movement of people and animals accelerates this dispersal process. Pet dogs that spend vacations in tick-infested areas return home carrying hitchhiking parasites. Livestock transported between regions introduce ticks to new agricultural areas. Even military personnel and international travelers become unwitting vectors for tick dispersal, carrying attached parasites across oceans and international borders. Climate change creates new opportunities for your descendants in regions that were once too cold to support tick populations. Warming temperatures allow ticks to survive winter conditions that would have killed previous generations, extending their active seasons and expanding their geographic range northward. Areas that experienced only occasional tick problems now face year-round tick activity. The changing climate also affects the timing of tick life cycles, sometimes allowing multiple generations to complete development within a single year. This reproductive acceleration increases tick population density in favorable habitats, creating higher encounter rates between ticks and potential hosts. Some areas that once had manageable tick populations now face explosive growth that overwhelms natural predator control mechanisms. Your descendants encounter new predator species as their range expands. Some birds that never evolved alongside ticks learn to recognize them as food sources, developing hunting strategies specifically for harvesting parasites from vegetation. Introduced species like guinea fowl become biological control agents, consuming thousands of ticks per day in areas where they're established. But tick populations also benefit from some human activities. Bird feeding stations concentrate avian hosts in small areas, creating ideal conditions for tick reproduction and dispersal. Wildlife rehabilitation efforts that increase deer populations provide more large hosts for adult tick feeding. Even conservation programs that restore natural habitats sometimes inadvertently create perfect tick breeding environments. The suburban interfaces, where human development meets natural habitat, become particularly productive tick territory. Edge environments typically support higher wildlife diversity, providing more potential hosts for developing ticks. Ornamental landscaping with dense ground cover creates ideal questing habitat, while irrigation systems maintain the humidity levels that ticks need for successful molting. Your descendants that establish themselves in these suburban environments face different challenges than their forest dwelling relatives. They must navigate sprinkler systems that can dislodge questing ticks, survive lawn care chemicals that weren't part of the natural ecosystem, and adapt to artificial lighting that changes normal activity patterns. Some suburban ticks develop behavioral modifications that improve their success in these modified environments. They learn to quest from garden plants rather than native vegetation, adjust their activity timing to match when pets and humans are most likely to be outdoors, and select attachment sites that are less likely to be discovered during routine grooming or bathing. The pets that live in these suburban environments become bridges between wild tick populations and human households. Dogs and cats that spend time outdoors regularly acquire ticks, bringing them into homes where they might drop off and establish breeding populations in unexpected locations. Indoor tick infestations, while rare, create entirely new ecological niches that some of your descendants learn to exploit. Your genetic material continues to spread through these expanding tick populations, carried by individuals that successfully navigate the challenges of life in human dominated landscapes. Each successful reproduction event multiplies your biological legacy, creating more carriers of the genetic adaptations that allowed you to thrive in your original forest habitat. The diseases your offspring carry become increasingly problematic as tick populations expand into new areas. Medical facilities in regions that rarely dealt with tick-borne illness suddenly face cases of Lyme disease, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and other conditions that trace their origins back to ticks like you. Healthcare workers must learn to recognize symptoms they've never encountered. Diagnostic laboratories must develop new testing capabilities, and public health agencies must create education campaigns about diseases that were once geographically limited. Some of your descendants carry novel pathogens that haven't been identified by human science. These unknown disease agents hitchhike along with the more familiar bacteria and viruses, waiting for the right conditions to emerge as new threats to human and animal health. The tick gut serves as a mixing chamber where different pathogens can exchange genetic material, potentially creating entirely new disease organisms. Research laboratories study ticks descended from your lineage, extracting DNA to understand how tick populations spread and adapt to new environments. Scientists map the genetic relationships between tick populations, tracing lineages back through multiple generations to understand how rapidly these parasites can colonize new territory. Your descendants also contribute to scientific understanding of disease ecology. Researchers collect them from vegetation and analyze the pathogens they carry, building databases of tick-borne disease distribution that inform public health decisions. Some ticks descended from you end up preserved in museum collections, their bodies serving as permanent records of pathogen prevalence and genetic diversity at specific times and locations. The evolutionary pressure of human intervention creates new selection forces that shape tick development. Ticks that are better at avoiding detection survive and reproduce more successfully than those that are easily spotted and removed. Those that can transmit diseases more quickly have advantages over slower acting pathogens that might be eliminated before transmission occurs. Your offspring develop increasingly sophisticated strategies for attachment and feeding. Some produce more effective anesthetics that prevent hosts from detecting their presence. Others develop stronger cement compounds that resist removal attempts. The most successful combine multiple adaptations, creating super ticks that are difficult to detect, hard to remove, and highly effective at disease transmission. The arms race between ticks and their hosts intensifies as both sides develop new capabilities. Host immune systems become more effective at recognizing and responding to tick saliva, while ticks evolve better immune suppression strategies. Grooming behaviors become more thorough and systematic, while ticks become better at selecting attachment sites that are difficult to reach. Human technology enters this evolutionary battlefield through the development of new repellents, protective clothing, and removal tools. Smart clothing that can detect tick attachment, chemical treatments that kill ticks on contact, and smartphone apps that help identify dangerous species all represent human attempts to gain advantages in the ancient war between parasites and hosts. But evolution doesn't pause for technological innovation. Your descendants that survive these interventions pass on their resistance genes, gradually creating tick populations that are less affected by human countermeasures. The biological imperative to feed and reproduce drives continuous adaptation, ensuring that ticks remain formidable opponents despite human technological advantages. The economic impact of tick-borne disease grows as your descendants spread into new areas and encounter more human hosts. Medical costs for treating tick-borne illnesses climb into billions of dollars annually, while lost productivity from chronic conditions affects entire communities. Some areas experience property value declines as tick problems make outdoor activities too risky for residents. Agricultural impacts multiply as tick populations affect livestock health and productivity. Cattle that carry heavy tick loads produce less milk and gain weight more slowly, affecting farm profitability. The diseases your descendants transmit can cause pregnancy losses in livestock, further reducing agricultural productivity in affected areas. Your biological legacy extends into veterinary medicine as well, where tick-borne diseases in pets create new diagnostic and treatment challenges. Veterinarians in areas newly colonized by tick populations must learn to recognize symptoms they've rarely encountered, while pet owners face increased medical costs and the emotional burden of watching their animals suffer from tick-transmitted diseases. The pet pharmaceutical industry responds by developing new tick control products, creating an economic sector worth billions of dollars globally. Flea and tick collars, topical treatments, oral medications, and environmental sprays all represent human attempts to break the connection between ticks and their animal hosts. Some of your descendants develop resistance to these veterinary treatments, requiring the development of new active ingredients and application methods. The constant evolution of tick resistance drives ongoing research and development, creating a perpetual cycle of innovation and adaptation that benefits both the pharmaceutical industry and the ticks that survive treatment. Wild animal populations also feel the effects of expanding tick ranges and increasing disease pressure. Some species that evolved alongside ticks have natural resistance to tick-borne diseases, while others that encounter ticks for the first time have no evolutionary defenses. The introduction of tick populations into new areas can devastate naive host species, creating cascading ecological effects that ripple through entire ecosystems. Conservation efforts sometimes conflict with tick control measures, as treatments that reduce tick populations might also affect non-target species. The challenge of managing tick-borne disease while protecting biodiversity creates complex management problems that require balancing human health concerns with ecological preservation goals. Your descendants continue to play their ancient role as disease vectors, but the scale and impact of their activities have expanded far beyond anything that existed during your lifetime. The diseases you helped collect and transmit now affect human populations on multiple continents, influence agricultural practices across vast regions, and drive research efforts in laboratories around the world. The forest, where you completed your life cycle, has become just one small part of a global tick ecosystem that includes suburban lawns, urban parks, agricultural lands, and even indoor environments where ticks occasionally establish themselves. Your genetic material flows through this expanded network, carried by ticks that have adapted to environments you never could have survived in. Each successful feeding by one of your descendants represents both a continuation of your biological legacy and a potential new chapter in the ongoing story of tick-host interactions. The blood meals that fuel tick reproduction also serve as opportunities for pathogen acquisition and transmission, maintaining the disease reservoirs that make ticks such effective biological weapons. The cycle that began with your emergence from an egg, smaller than a grain of sand, has expanded into a global phenomenon affecting millions of hosts across dozens of species. Your individual contribution to this vast biological network was small but essential, providing genetic material and pathogen reservoirs that continue to influence tick evolution and disease ecology decades after your death. Your descendants face challenges you never encountered: chemical treatments, mechanical removal, diagnostic testing, and targeted elimination programs designed specifically to reduce tick populations and disease transmission. But they also benefit from opportunities you never had: expanded host ranges, new geographic territories, and environmental conditions that favor rapid reproduction and population growth. The patient determination that characterized your own questing behavior continues to define tick success in human-dominated landscapes. Your descendants wait with the same infinite patience on garden plants and lawn edges, legs extended, ready to grasp onto any warm-blooded creature that passes within reach. The ancient strategy of motionless waiting, followed by aggressive attachment, remains as effective today as it was during your lifetime. The diseases you collected during your feeding sessions continue to circulate through tick populations, maintained by the constant cycle of feeding, molting, and reproduction that defines tick existence. Some pathogens have evolved since your time, becoming more virulent or developing new transmission strategies, while others remain essentially unchanged, relying on the same infection mechanisms that proved successful during your era. Your story of survival and reproduction has been repeated countless times through your descendants, each individual tick playing out the same basic narrative of hatching, questing, feeding, and reproducing. But the collective impact of these individual stories has created one of the most successful parasitic strategies in the natural world, a biological system so effective that it continues to thrive despite intensive human efforts to control it. The ticks that currently quest on vegetation around the world, waiting for their next blood meal, carry within them the accumulated evolutionary wisdom of millions of years of parasitic success. Your genetic contribution to this ancient lineage was small but significant, adding to the genetic diversity that allows tick populations to adapt to changing environmental conditions and continue their successful exploitation of vertebrate hosts. Your brief life of patient questing, successful feeding, and productive reproduction achieved its fundamental biological purpose: the continuation of your genetic lineage and the maintenance of the pathogen reservoirs that make ticks such effective disease vectors. The forest where you lived and died continues to support new generations of ticks, but your influence now extends far beyond that single ecosystem, carried by descendants that have colonized habitats across the globe. The story that began with your hatching from a tiny egg continues today in millions of similar eggs scattered across continents, each one containing a tick that will carry forward the biological programming that made your life successful. The cycle of parasitic survival that you completed so effectively continues with mechanical precision, driven by the same evolutionary forces that shaped your own existence and ensured your reproductive success. In the end, your individual story was both unique and utterly typical, one tick among billions, living the same basic narrative of survival and reproduction that defines tick existence. But your contribution to the species' genetic diversity and pathogen reservoir was permanent and significant, helping to maintain the biological systems that make ticks one of the most successful groups of parasites on Earth. The legacy of your life extends far beyond the immediate effects of your own feeding and reproduction, influencing the evolution of tick populations, the distribution of tick-borne diseases, and the ongoing biological warfare between parasites and hosts that has shaped life on Earth for millions of years. Your story is complete, but the story of your species continues, carried forward by descendants that inherit both your genes and your role as vectors for the ancient pathogens that make ticks such formidable biological opponents. The modern world your descendants inhabit bears little resemblance to the forest where you completed your life cycle. Concrete sidewalks replace deer paths, manicured lawns substitute for wild meadows, and the steady hum of traffic drowns out the natural sounds that once defined your acoustic environment. Yet your offspring adapt with the same evolutionary flexibility that allowed you to thrive in your simpler time. Urban ticks, descended from your lineage quest, from ornamental shrubs and decorative grasses, their ancient programming intact despite the artificial surroundings. They position themselves along jogging trails where humans pass in predictable patterns, their timing refined by generations of selection pressure. The morning jogger who brushes against a hedge becomes an unwitting participant in the same biological drama that played out during your lifetime, just in a different setting. Your descendants encounter hosts you could never have imagined. Pampered house cats that venture onto balconies provide easy blood meals for ticks that have learned to exploit high-rise environments. Therapy dogs visiting hospitals carry your offspring into sterile medical facilities, where the contrast between ancient parasitism and modern medicine creates surreal juxtapositions. Even zoo animals in carefully controlled environments sometimes acquire ticks that trace their genetic lineage back to your forest home. The veterinary clinics, where pet owners seek treatment for tick-borne diseases, have become monuments to your biological legacy. Examination rooms filled with suffering animals, their conditions caused by bacteria that your descendants inherited from ticks like you, represent the far-reaching consequences of your successful reproduction. The antibiotics prescribed to treat these infections are chemical weapons in an evolutionary arms race that began millions of years before your birth and continues long after your death. Some of your offspring develop resistance to these medical interventions, their genetic modifications allowing them to survive treatments that would have killed their ancestors. The ticks that emerge from medicated animals carry genes that encode for chemical resistance, passing these adaptations to their own offspring and gradually shifting entire populations toward immunity to human countermeasures. Research laboratories around the world study specimens descended from your lineage, their genetic material extracted and analyzed to understand how tick populations adapt to changing environments. Scientists map the evolutionary relationships between different tick groups, sometimes tracing genetic markers back through multiple generations to understand how rapidly these parasites can colonize new territories and develop new capabilities. Your descendants participate unwillingly in scientific studies designed to understand disease transmission, their bodies serving as living laboratories where researchers can observe pathogen development and transmission mechanisms. The bacteria that flow through their guts and salivary glands are the same organisms you once carried, maintained through generations of successful reproduction and host to host transmission. Climate monitoring stations record temperature and humidity changes that directly affect tick survival and reproduction rates in areas colonized by your descendants. The data collected helps predict where tick populations might expand next, but it also reveals how successfully your offspring have adapted to environmental conditions that would have been challenging during your lifetime. Global positioning systems track the movement of infected animals, creating maps that show how tick-borne diseases spread across landscapes and between regions. Some of these disease outbreaks can be traced back to individual ticks whose genetic material connects them to populations that descended from your original forest ecosystem. Satellite imagery reveals the changing land use patterns that create new opportunities for tick populations. Forest fragmentation, suburban expansion, and agricultural development all create edge environments where ticks and hosts interact more frequently than in undisturbed natural areas. Your descendants exploit these artificial environments with the same efficiency they bring to natural habitats. The internet carries information about tick identification and disease prevention to millions of people worldwide, creating an unprecedented level of public awareness about the threats posed by your descendants. Online forums where people share stories of tick encounters and disease experiences create virtual communities united by their common experience with the biological legacy you helped create. Social media platforms spread images of engorged ticks and disease symptoms, educating the public about the appearance and behavior of your descendants. These digital networks accelerate the spread of information about tick-borne diseases, but they also sometimes spread misinformation that complicates public health efforts to control tick populations and prevent disease transmission. Mobile phone applications help users identify tick species and assess disease transmission risks, bringing sophisticated diagnostic capabilities to remote locations where your descendants encounter hosts far from medical facilities. GPS coordinates recorded by these apps create databases that track tick distribution patterns and help predict where new populations might establish themselves. Electronic monitoring devices attached to wildlife track animal movements and behavior patterns, sometimes revealing how tick infestations affect host activity levels and habitat use. The data collected shows how your descendants influence ecosystem dynamics beyond their immediate effects on individual hosts, creating cascading ecological impacts that ripple through entire food webs. Automated weather stations and tick habitats collect the environmental data that determines where your descendants can successfully complete their life cycles. Temperature and humidity measurements help predict when conditions will favor tick reproduction and when environmental stress might limit population growth. The pharmaceutical industry has developed into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, partly in response to the diseases your descendants carry and transmit. Research and development programs focused on new tick control products, improved diagnostic tests, and more effective treatments for tick-borne illnesses all represent economic responses to the biological challenge posed by your offspring. Manufacturing facilities produce millions of tick removal tools, repellent formulations, and protective clothing items designed to reduce human contact with your descendants. The global supply chains that distribute these products create economic networks that exist solely because of the ongoing threat posed by tick populations descended from individuals like you. Insurance companies calculate premiums based partly on tick-borne disease risks in different geographic areas, creating economic incentives for tick control and disease prevention activities. The actuarial tables that determine these calculations include data about disease transmission rates and treatment costs that reflect the cumulative impact of successful reproduction by your descendants. Medical schools teach courses about tick identification and tick-borne disease diagnosis, training new generations of healthcare providers to recognize and treat the conditions caused by pathogens your descendants carry. The textbooks used in these courses include photographs of ticks that might be direct descendants of your offspring, their images serving as educational tools for combating the diseases you helped spread. Public health agencies maintain surveillance systems that monitor tick population dynamics and disease transmission patterns in areas where your descendants have established breeding populations. The epidemiological data collected helps guide control efforts and prevention programs designed to reduce the impact of tick-borne diseases on human and animal health. International health organizations coordinate responses to emerging tick-borne diseases that spread across national borders as infected hosts and tick populations move between countries. The global nature of modern travel and trade creates opportunities for rapid disease spread that didn't exist during your lifetime, amplifying the potential impact of the pathogens your descendants carry. Customs and Border Control agencies inspect imported animals and plant materials for hitchhiking ticks that might introduce new species or disease strains to previously unaffected areas. These inspection programs represent governmental responses to the threat posed by tick dispersal, but they can only intercept a small fraction of the ticks that cross international boundaries each year. Agricultural extension services provide farmers and livestock owners with information about tick control methods and disease prevention strategies, helping to protect domestic animals from the pathogens carried by your descendants. The economic losses prevented by these programs demonstrate the ongoing financial impact of tick-borne diseases on agricultural productivity. Veterinary schools include tick biology and tick-borne disease management in their curricula, preparing future animal health professionals to diagnose and treat the conditions caused by your descendants. The clinical cases these students encounter during their training often involve animals infected with bacteria that can trace their lineage back through generations of successful tick reproduction. Wildlife management agencies monitor the health impacts of tick-borne diseases on wild animal populations, sometimes implementing control programs when tick infestations threaten endangered or economically important species. The ecological relationships between ticks, hosts, and pathogens create complex management challenges that require balancing disease control with habitat conservation. Environmental consulting firms assess tick-related health risks for development projects, helping to identify areas where human activities might increase exposure to tick-borne diseases. The risk assessments they produce influence land use decisions and development patterns in ways that indirectly affect the habitats available to your descendants. Pest control companies have developed specialized services for tick management in residential and commercial properties, creating an entire industry sector focused on reducing tick populations in human occupied areas. The chemical treatments and habitat modifications they implement represent direct interventions in the ecological relationships that allow your descendants to thrive. Landscape architects design outdoor spaces with tick control considerations in mind, selecting plant species and creating maintenance regimens that reduce tick habitat while maintaining aesthetic and functional goals. The modified environments they create change the ecological conditions that determine where your descendants can successfully establish breeding populations. The tourism industry in tick-endemic areas provides visitors with information about tick-borne disease risks and prevention strategies, helping to protect travelers who might not be aware of local health threats. The economic impact of tick-borne diseases on tourism demonstrates how your descendants' activities affect human commerce and recreation. Outdoor recreation organizations educate their members about tick identification and removal techniques, teaching skills that help prevent disease transmission during hiking, camping, and other wilderness activities. The knowledge they disseminate helps people avoid the diseases carried by your descendants while still enjoying natural environments. Environmental education programs include information about tick ecology and disease transmission, helping to build public understanding of the complex relationships between ticks, hosts, and pathogens. The curriculum materials they develop often feature examples of tick biology and behavior that reflect the evolutionary strategies that made your own life successful. Museum exhibits about local wildlife that sometimes include displays about tick biology and disease ecology, educating visitors about the role these parasites play in natural ecosystems. The preserved specimens they display might include ticks that are genetic relatives of your descendants, their bodies serving as educational tools for understanding parasitic relationships. Nature centers and interpretive facilities provide visitors with information about tick-borne disease prevention while encouraging appreciation for natural ecosystems. The balance they try to achieve between education and conservation reflects the complex relationship between human health concerns and ecological preservation goals. Scientific conferences bring together researchers studying tick biology, ecology, and disease transmission, creating forums for sharing knowledge about the challenges posed by tick populations, descended from individuals like you. The presentations they feature often include data collected from field studies in areas where your offspring have established successful breeding populations. Peer-reviewed journals publish research articles about tick population dynamics, disease transmission mechanisms, and control strategies, contributing to the scientific understanding of parasitic relationships that evolved over millions of years. The data they present sometimes includes genetic information extracted from ticks that carry DNA sequences inherited from your original population. Grant funding agencies support research programs focused on understanding and controlling tick-borne diseases, directing millions of dollars towards scientific efforts to reduce the impact of the pathogens your descendants carry. The research priorities they establish reflect the ongoing public health challenges created by successful tick reproduction and disease transmission. Technology companies develop new tools for tick identification, disease diagnosis, and population monitoring, creating innovative solutions to ancient biological challenges. The smartphone apps, diagnostic devices, and monitoring systems they produce represent technological responses to evolutionary strategies that proved successful during your lifetime and continue to work effectively for your descendants. Biotechnology firms research genetic modifications that might reduce tick reproduction or disease transmission capabilities, pursuing high-tech solutions to biological problems that have existed for millions of years. The genetic targets they identify often involve the same biological pathways that allowed you to successfully feed, reproduce, and transmit diseases to your hosts. Data analytics companies process the vast amounts of information collected about tick populations and disease patterns, looking for insights that might improve control strategies or predict future outbreaks. The algorithms they develop sometimes identify correlations and patterns that reflect the underlying biological processes you participated in during your own life cycle. Machine learning systems analyze satellite imagery and environmental data to predict where tick populations might expand next, using artificial intelligence to understand biological processes that evolved through millions of years of natural selection. The models they create attempt to predict the behavior of organisms whose fundamental strategies haven't changed since your era. The global supply chains that distribute tick control products create economic networks spanning multiple continents, all focused on managing the threats posed by organisms like your descendants. The international trade in repellents, removal tools, protective clothing, and diagnostic equipment represents a massive economic response to the biological challenge posed by successful tick reproduction. Financial markets track the performance of companies involved in tick-borne disease management, creating investment opportunities based on the ongoing threat posed by tick populations. The stock prices and market valuations of these companies reflect investor confidence in the continued demand for products and services designed to combat the biological legacy you helped create. Economic analyses calculate the total costs of tick-borne diseases to healthcare systems, agricultural industries, and tourism sectors, quantifying the financial impact of successful tick reproduction and disease transmission. The numbers they generate demonstrate how individual biological success stories like yours aggregate into major economic challenges for human society. Your descendants continue to write new chapters in the ancient story of parasitic success, adapting to technological interventions while maintaining the fundamental biological strategies that allowed you to thrive in your forest habitat. They quest with the same patient determination you once displayed, feed with the same ruthless efficiency, and reproduce with the same biological imperative that drove your own life cycle. The diseases they carry continue to evolve, sometimes becoming more virulent or developing resistance to medical treatments, ensuring that the biological weapons you helped maintain remain effective against host immune systems. The pathogens that flow through their salivary glands during feeding are direct descendants of the organisms you once harbored, maintained through generations of successful reproduction and host-to-host transmission. Climate change creates new opportunities for your descendants in regions that were once too cold to support tick populations, while also creating challenges in areas that become too hot or dry for successful reproduction. The environmental changes that affect tick distribution and abundance reflect the same physical forces that influenced your own survival and reproductive success. Human population growth and urbanization create new interfaces between tick habitats and human activities, generating more opportunities for disease transmission while also creating pressure for more effective control measures. The expanding boundaries between natural and human-dominated landscapes provide your descendants with access to host populations that were largely unavailable during your lifetime. Globalization accelerates the movement of ticks and tick-borne diseases between continents, creating opportunities for rapid colonization of new territories and introduction of novel pathogens to naive host populations. The international networks that facilitate modern commerce and travel also serve as highways for tick dispersal, spreading your genetic legacy across oceans and national boundaries. The story that began with your emergence from a tiny egg continues to unfold in millions of similar eggs scattered across the globe, each one containing a tick programmed with the same biological imperatives that drove your successful life cycle. The ancient strategies of patient questing, aggressive attachment, and efficient disease transmission remain as effective today as they were during your era, ensuring that your descendants continue to thrive despite intensive human efforts to control them. Your individual contribution to this vast biological network was small but permanent, adding genetic diversity and pathogen reservoirs to populations that now affect ecosystems on every continent. The diseases you helped collect and maintain continue to challenge human medicine, veterinary science, and public health systems worldwide, creating ongoing reminders of the far-reaching consequences of successful parasitic reproduction. The cycle of tick survival and reproduction that you completed so effectively has expanded into a global phenomenon affecting millions of hosts across dozens of species, creating one of the most successful biological systems ever evolved. Your genetic material flows through this expanded network, carried by ticks that have adapted to environments ranging from Arctic tundra to tropical rainforests, from pristine wilderness areas to densely populated urban centers. The patient determination that characterized your questing behavior continues to define tick success in rapidly changing environments, as your descendants wait with infinite patience for opportunities to continue the ancient cycle of parasitic exploitation that has proven successful for millions of years. Their success ensures that your biological legacy will continue to influence disease ecology and host-parasite relationships for generations to come, making your brief life an integral part of one of evolution's most enduring success stories. The forest ecosystem, where your descendants now hunt, has become a laboratory for biological warfare, each interaction between tick and host a small experiment in evolutionary adaptation. Your offspring don't just feed randomly. They've developed sophisticated targeting strategies that would make military strategists envious. Some specialize in ambushing joggers at predictable morning hours, positioning themselves along popular running trails where humans pass in steady streams. Others focus on dog parks where pets congregate, creating feeding opportunities that didn't exist during your simpler era. Your descendant ticks have learned to read environmental cues with precision that borders on the supernatural. They detect the carbon dioxide plumes from approaching hosts at distances that would have been impossible for you, their sensory organs refined through generations of natural selection. When a family decides to have a backyard barbecue, ticks descended from your lineage begin moving toward the activity hours before the first guests arrive, drawn by the subtle chemical signals that indicate a feeding bonanza is approaching. The children who play in yards where your offspring wait represent perfect targets, small, unaware, and unlikely to perform the systematic tick checks that adults have learned to conduct. Your descendants attach to ankles and scalp lines, areas where detection is difficult and removal is often incomplete. The diseases they transmit to these young hosts create lifelong health challenges that ripple through families and communities, turning your genetic legacy into a public health crisis that affects entire generations. School playgrounds have become battlegrounds where your descendants employ tactics that would impress any military commander. They concentrate their forces along fence lines and playground borders, knowing that children running and playing will inevitably brush against vegetation where ticks are questing. The timing is perfect. Recess periods provide predictable waves of potential hosts, while the chaos of playground activity makes detection nearly impossible until hours later. Your offspring that successfully feed on school children often go undetected for days, completing their blood meals, while parents remain unaware that disease transmission is occurring. The bite sites become infected, not just with the tick's feeding damage, but with bacteria that have been maintained in tick populations since your era. These microscopic passengers establish infections that might not show symptoms for weeks, creating diagnostic challenges that strain medical systems. The suburban lawns where many of your descendants now hunt represent artificial ecosystems that favor tick success in ways natural habitats never could. Irrigation systems maintain perfect humidity levels year round, while landscaping practices create dense ground cover that provides ideal questing sites. Property owners who think they're creating beautiful outdoor spaces are actually constructing tick habitat that supports population densities far higher than natural environments could sustain. Your descendants have adapted their questing behavior to exploit human landscaping preferences. They position themselves on ornamental grasses and decorative shrubs, knowing that homeowners and their pets will regularly come into contact with these features during routine yard maintenance. The weekly lawn mowing that many suburbanites perform becomes a scheduled feeding opportunity, with ticks positioning themselves along the edges where mowers can't reach. Garden centers and nurseries have become inadvertent distribution networks for your offspring, who hitchhike on plants and soil shipments to colonize new territories hundreds of miles from their birthplaces. A potted plant purchased at a garden center might carry a dozen questing ticks, each one ready to establish a new population in whatever yard it ends up in. Your genetic material spreads through these commercial networks faster than it ever could through natural dispersal mechanisms. The landscaping industry has become an unwitting ally in tick distribution as crews move between properties carrying equipment that transports ticks from heavily infested areas to previously tick-free neighborhoods. Lawnmowers, leaf blowers, and other maintenance equipment become vehicles for tick dispersal, spreading your descendants across entire metropolitan areas within single growing seasons. Professional landscapers who work in tick-infested areas often become walking disease vectors themselves, carrying multiple attached ticks as they move between job sites. Their work clothes and equipment create mobile tick habitat that allows your offspring to colonize new areas with remarkable efficiency. A single landscaping crew can introduce tick populations to dozens of properties in a single week, spreading your genetic legacy across vast suburban territories. The timing of landscaping activities often coincides perfectly with peak tick questing periods, creating ideal conditions for host parasite encounters. Spring cleanup activities bring humans into direct contact with overwintering tick populations just as they're becoming active after months of dormancy. Fall leaf removal disturbs the sheltered areas where ticks are preparing for winter, forcing them onto vegetation where they're more likely to encounter passing hosts. Your descendants have learned to exploit the seasonal rhythms of suburban life with precision that reflects millions of years of evolutionary refinement. They time their peak activity periods to coincide with outdoor recreational activities, positioning themselves for maximum host contact during barbecue season, graduation parties, and other outdoor gatherings. The social calendar of suburban communities has become a feeding schedule for tick populations. Memorial Day weekend marks the beginning of peak tick season in many areas, as families venture outdoors for the first major outdoor activities of the year. Your descendants are ready and waiting, having spent the spring months positioning themselves along hiking trails, in picnic areas, and around swimming pools where humans will congregate in large numbers. The holiday that celebrates military sacrifice becomes a launching point for biological warfare conducted by your offspring. Summer camps represent concentrated feeding opportunities that your descendants exploit with ruthless efficiency. Hundreds of children spending weeks in tick habitat create ideal conditions for disease transmission, while the group living situation ensures that tick-borne illnesses spread rapidly through camp populations. The outdoor activities that define the camp experience, hiking, camping, swimming in natural areas, bring campers into direct contact with questing ticks at every turn. Camp counselors often become unwitting disease vectors, carrying ticks between different activity areas and potentially introducing new pathogens to camp populations. Their daily routines take them through multiple tick habitats, while their responsibility for supervising children means they're often too busy to perform adequate tick checks on themselves. The infections they acquire can spread to entire cabin groups through close contact and shared facilities. The summer camp experience that many families consider essential for child development has become a major source of tick-borne disease exposure. Parents who send their children to camp expecting them to return healthy and happy often find themselves dealing with mysterious illnesses that don't manifest symptoms until weeks after camp ends. The delayed onset of many tick-borne diseases means that the connection between camp exposure and subsequent illness is often missed entirely. Your descendants that establish themselves in camp environments often find ideal conditions for reproduction and population growth. The combination of abundant hosts, minimal pest control measures, and habitat disturbance creates perfect breeding conditions that can support tick population explosions. A single summer camp might generate thousands of new ticks that will spread into surrounding communities when campers and staff return to their homes. The overnight camping experience that many camps feature puts children in direct contact with tick habitat during the hours when many tick species are most active. Sleeping in tents or cabins located in wooded areas provides extended exposure opportunities that day-use facilities can't match. Your offspring can spend entire nights seeking attachment opportunities while campers sleep, often successfully feeding without detection until long after the camping experience has ended. Athletic fields and sports complexes have become unexpected tick habitat as your descendants adapt to human recreational preferences. Soccer fields bordered by wooded areas provide perfect interfaces between tick habitat and human activity, while cross-country running courses take athletes directly through prime tick territory. The emphasis on outdoor sports and physical fitness that characterizes modern recreation creates countless opportunities for tick-host encounters. Youth sports leagues often schedule practices and games during peak tick activity periods, bringing dozens of children into contact with tick populations on a regular basis. The combination of physical activity, minimal protective clothing, and outdoor venues creates ideal conditions for tick attachment. Parents watching games from sidelines often acquire ticks themselves, spreading infections through entire families and social networks. The sports equipment used in outdoor activities becomes a vector for tick transport, as balls, goals, and other gear pick up questing ticks during games and practices. Equipment storage areas in schools and recreation centers can become reservoirs for tick populations, allowing your descendants to survive between seasons and colonize new areas when equipment is moved or shared between facilities. Tournament travel in youth sports creates opportunities for rapid tick dispersal across wide geographic areas. Teams traveling to competitions in different regions often encounter tick populations they've never been exposed to, acquiring new strains of tick-borne diseases that they then carry back to their home communities. Your descendants use these athletic networks to spread across state and regional boundaries with remarkable efficiency. The outdoor wedding industry has become an unexpected ally in tick distribution, as couples choosing natural settings for their ceremonies often select venues that provide ideal tick habitat. Garden weddings, outdoor receptions, and destination wedding locations frequently feature the wooded edges and ornamental landscaping that ticks prefer for questing. The formal attire worn at these events often provides limited protection against tick attachment, while the extended outdoor exposure during ceremonies and receptions creates perfect feeding opportunities. Wedding photographers working in natural settings often acquire multiple tick attachments during single events, carrying your descendants between different venues and potentially introducing new tick populations to previously uninfested areas. Their professional activities take them through prime tick habitat, while they're focused on capturing images rather than monitoring for tick attachment. The trend toward outdoor weddings and natural venue selections has created an entire industry sector that unknowingly facilitates tick dispersal. Venue operators, caterers, florists, and other wedding service providers move between locations carrying equipment and materials that can transport questing ticks across wide geographic areas. The wedding industry's emphasis on natural beauty and outdoor settings aligns perfectly with tick habitat preferences. Honeymoon destinations that feature outdoor activities and natural settings provide extended exposure opportunities for newlyweds who may not be aware of local tick-borne disease risks. Couples focused on romance and relaxation often neglect basic tick prevention measures, creating ideal conditions for disease transmission during what should be the happiest time of their lives. Your descendants turn romantic getaways into potential medical emergencies. The outdoor recreation industry has grown into a multi-billion-dollar sector that depends on activities taking place in tick habitat. Hiking, camping, fishing, hunting, and other outdoor pursuits bring millions of people into direct contact with tick populations every year. The gear and clothing designed for these activities often provides inadequate protection against tick attachment, while the emphasis on connecting with nature encourages behaviors that increase exposure risk. Outdoor gear retailers have become unwitting distributors of tick prevention information as customer demand drives the development of new products designed to reduce tick encounter risks. Permethrin-treated clothing, tick removal tools, and repellent formulations represent market responses to the biological challenge posed by your descendants. The outdoor recreation industry's economic success now depends partly on helping customers avoid the diseases carried by tick populations. Hunting seasons bring thousands of people into prime tick habitat during periods when many tick species are actively questing. Hunters spending hours in wooded areas while wearing camouflage clothing that provides minimal tick protection often acquire multiple tick attachments during single outings. The field dressing and meat processing activities associated with hunting create additional opportunities for tick exposure, while the social aspects of hunting camps facilitate disease transmission within hunting communities. The hunting industry has developed specialized tick prevention products and education programs in response to the high disease transmission rates among hunters. Tick repellent clothing, specialized removal tools, and awareness campaigns represent industry efforts to protect participants while maintaining the outdoor traditions that define hunting culture. Your descendants have forced an entire recreational industry to adapt its practices and products. Fishing enthusiasts who frequent wooded streams and pond edges encounter tick populations that have learned to exploit aquatic interfaces. So your descendants position themselves along fishing access points, knowing that anglers will repeatedly brush against vegetation while moving to different fishing spots. The long hours that dedicated fishermen spend in tick habitat create extended exposure periods that often result in multiple tick attachments. The catch and release fishing practices that many anglers follow require repeated visits to the same fishing locations, creating predictable patterns that tick populations learn to exploit. Your descendants can anticipate when and where fishermen will appear, positioning themselves for optimal host contact during peak fishing periods. The ritualistic nature of fishing activities makes anglers ideal targets for tick feeding strategies. Camping equipment and outdoor gear have become vehicles for tick dispersal as campers move between different natural areas, carrying infected ticks on their equipment. Tents and sleeping bags, backpacks, and other camping gear provide transportation for your descendants, allowing them to colonize new areas hundreds of miles from their original habitat. The outdoor recreation industry has inadvertently created a distribution network for tick populations. National and state parks have become concentration points for tick-human interactions, as millions of visitors seek outdoor recreation experiences in natural settings. Park facilities, hiking trails, and camping areas provide perfect interfaces between tick habitat and human activity. The Park Service's mission to provide access to natural areas conflicts with the need to protect visitors from tick-borne diseases, creating management challenges that affect park operations and visitor experiences. Trail maintenance activities in parks and natural areas often disturb tick habitat in ways that increase human exposure risks. Clearing vegetation, maintaining trail surfaces, and installing interpretive facilities bring park workers into direct contact with tick populations while creating conditions that favor tick host encounters. The infrastructure needed to support outdoor recreation often enhances the very biological systems that threaten visitor health. Interpretive programs and guided nature walks offered by parks and nature centers bring groups of people into tick habitat while encouraging behaviors that increase exposure risks. Nature education that emphasizes close observation of plants and wildlife often requires participants to move through dense vegetation where ticks are questing. The educational mission of these programs conflicts with basic tick avoidance strategies. Volunteer programs for habitat restoration and trail maintenance attract environmentally conscious participants who often lack adequate knowledge about tick-borne disease prevention. These volunteers spend extended periods working in prime tick habitat while performing activities that increase their exposure to questing ticks. The conservation work they perform creates ideal conditions for tick host encounters while potentially disturbing tick populations in ways that increase attack behavior. The environmental movement's emphasis on connecting people with nature has created educational and recreational opportunities that inevitably increase human exposure to tick populations. Nature centers, environmental education programs, and outdoor schools all bring participants into direct contact with tick habitat while encouraging behaviors that facilitate tick attachment. Your descendants benefit from human efforts to appreciate and protect natural environments. Birdwatching and wildlife observation activities require participants to spend extended periods in natural areas while remaining relatively motionless, creating ideal conditions for tick attachment. Birdwatchers often position themselves in edge habitats that provide optimal viewing opportunities, but also represent prime tick territory. The quiet observation behavior that defines birdwatching makes participants ideal targets for questing ticks. Photography enthusiasts seeking natural subjects often venture into remote areas with high tick populations while focusing their attention on capturing images rather than monitoring for tick attachment. Nature photographers working in macro photography or wildlife photography often spend hours in single locations, providing extended opportunities for tick feeding. The artistic pursuit of natural beauty brings photographers into direct conflict with natural disease vectors. Scientific research activities in natural areas bring researchers into extended contact with tick populations while they focus on data collection rather than personal protection. Field biologists, ecologists, and other researchers often work in prime tick habitat for extended periods while wearing minimal protective clothing. The scientific mission to understand natural systems requires direct exposure to the biological hazards those systems contain. Environmental monitoring programs that require regular sampling in natural areas create predictable patterns of human activity that tick populations learn to exploit. Research technicians visiting the same monitoring sites on regular schedules provide reliable feeding opportunities for ticks that have learned to anticipate human presence. The scientific infrastructure needed to study ecosystems becomes part of the ecological relationships it seeks to understand. Graduate students conducting field research often spend months in tick habitat while focusing on their research objectives rather than personal health protection. The academic pressure to collect data and complete research projects often overrides basic tick prevention measures, creating ideal conditions for disease transmission among the next generation of environmental scientists. Your descendants benefit from the dedication that drives scientific research. The citizen science movement has created volunteer monitoring programs that bring amateur naturalists into regular contact with tick populations. Participants in breeding bird surveys, plant monitoring programs, and other citizen science projects often lack adequate training in tick prevention while spending extended periods in natural areas. The democratic approach to scientific data collection creates new opportunities for tick-borne disease transmission. Agricultural extension programs that provide farmers with information about crop and livestock management often fail to adequately address tick-borne disease risks for agricultural workers. Farm workers who spend their careers in rural areas with high tick populations often lack access to current information about disease prevention and treatment. The agricultural industry's focus on productivity sometimes overlooks the health risks posed by endemic tick populations. Organic farming practices that emphasize reduced pesticide use often create conditions that favor tick population growth on agricultural properties. Farmers committed to environmental sustainability may unknowingly create ideal tick habitat while pursuing agricultural practices designed to protect ecosystem health. The conflict between environmental protection and disease prevention creates complex management challenges for sustainable agriculture. Agritourism operations that invite urban visitors to experience farm life often expose guests to tick populations they would never encounter in their normal environments. Farm tours, pick-your-own operations, and agricultural festivals bring city dwellers into direct contact with rural tick populations while providing minimal education about disease prevention. The romanticization of rural life overlooks the biological hazards that characterize agricultural environments. The farm to table movement that encourages direct relationships between food producers and consumers often involves urban visitors traveling to rural areas with high tick populations. Harvest festivals, farm dinners, and agricultural education programs bring participants into tick habitat while focusing their attention on food production rather than personal protection. Your descendants exploit the growing interest in agricultural experiences. Veterinary schools, located in rural areas, often expose students to high levels of tick-borne disease during their clinical training, as they work with animals that carry heavy tick loads. The hands-on experience that defines veterinary education requires direct contact with infected animals, while students focus on learning clinical skills rather than personal protection. The next generation of animal health professionals acquires tick-borne diseases during their professional training. Large animal veterinary practice in rural areas creates ongoing exposure risks for practitioners who must examine and treat livestock in environments with high tick populations. Farm calls require veterinarians to work in barns, pastures, and other agricultural settings where ticks are abundant while focusing their attention on animal health rather than personal protection. The economic structure of rural veterinary practice makes adequate tick prevention difficult to maintain. Livestock auction facilities and agricultural fairs concentrate animals from multiple farms in single locations, creating ideal conditions for tick dispersal between different agricultural operations. Your descendants use these agricultural networks to spread between farms and regions, hitchhiking on animals and equipment that move through auction and fair circuits. The agricultural economy becomes a distribution system for tick populations. 4-H programs and agricultural youth organizations expose children to tick populations while teaching them about animal husbandry and agricultural practices. Young people showing livestock at fairs and participating in agricultural education programs often lack adequate knowledge about tick prevention while spending extended periods in close contact with animals carrying heavy tick loads. Agricultural education becomes a pathway for disease transmission to rural youth. The equestrian industry creates extensive networks for tick dispersal as horses and riders move between different facilities and competition venues. Horse shows, trail riding activities, and equestrian sports bring participants into regular contact with tick populations while creating social networks that facilitate disease transmission. Your descendants exploit the mobility and social nature of equestrian activities. Horse trailer parking areas at equestrian events often become concentration points for tick populations, as multiple animals from different regions congregate in single locations. The equipment cleaning and animal grooming activities that occur in these areas create opportunities for tick transfer between horses from different geographic areas. Equestrian competitions become mixing chambers for tick populations and disease strains. Trail riding operations that offer guided horseback tours through natural areas expose both horses and riders to tick populations while focusing attention on the recreational experience rather than health protection. The slow pace of horseback travel through wooded areas provides ideal conditions for tick attachment, while the elevated position of mounted riders brings them into contact with ticks questing on taller vegetation. Boarding stables and equestrian facilities often become permanent reservoirs for tick populations, as horses from multiple owners congregate in areas with ideal tick habitat. Pastures, riding arenas, and barn areas provide perfect conditions for tick reproduction and host access, while the constant movement of horses and people creates opportunities for disease transmission throughout equestrian communities. The horse racing industry creates networks for rapid tick dispersal as thoroughbreds and standard breds move between training facilities and racing venues across wide geographic areas. The intensive management practices required for racing horses often overlook tick prevention measures while focusing on performance optimization. Racing circuits become highways for tick population dispersal and disease transmission. Rodeo circuits and Western equestrian events bring participants into contact with tick populations while celebrating rural traditions that emphasize outdoor activities and animal handling. The cultural values that define Western lifestyle often conflict with modern tick prevention strategies, creating communities with high disease transmission rates. Your descendants thrive in environments where traditional practices take precedence over health protection measures. The cattle ranching industry has become an inadvertent highway system for your descendants as livestock move between pastures and processing facilities carrying tick populations across vast distances. Ranch hands working with cattle during loading and transport operations often acquire multiple tick attachments while focusing on animal handling rather than personal protection. The economic pressures of modern ranching make comprehensive tick prevention programs difficult to implement and maintain. Veterinary treatment facilities for large animals concentrate infected livestock from multiple ranches in single locations, creating perfect conditions for tick population mixing and disease strain exchange. Your descendants use these facilities as transfer stations, moving between animals during treatment procedures and establishing new infections in previously clean herds. The infrastructure designed to maintain animal health becomes a distribution network for tick-borne diseases. Cattle processing plants receive animals from hundreds of different ranches, creating opportunities for tick populations to interact and exchange genetic material on an industrial scale. The holding pens and processing areas provide temporary habitat for ticks that drop off animals during the pre-slaughter period. Workers in these facilities face constant exposure to tick populations from across entire regions while focusing on production efficiency rather than disease prevention. The beef industry's emphasis on rapid processing and high throughput creates working conditions that favor tick transmission while making comprehensive prevention measures economically challenging. Meat processing workers who spend their shifts handling animals carrying heavy tick loads often lack adequate protective equipment or education about tick-borne disease risks. Your descendants exploit the industrial approach to livestock processing. Dairy operations create different but equally effective opportunities for tick population maintenance and dispersal. Milking parlors and dairy barns concentrate cattle in confined spaces where ticks can easily transfer between animals during routine operations. Dairy workers who handle cattle multiple times daily face repeated exposure to tick populations while focusing on milk production efficiency rather than personal protection. The dairy industry's emphasis on animal productivity and milk quality often overlooks the impact of tick-borne diseases on herd health and worker safety. Chronic infections in dairy cattle can reduce milk production and fertility while creating ongoing exposure risks for farm workers. Your descendants establish persistent populations in dairy facilities that can maintain disease transmission cycles for years. Artificial insemination programs in the cattle industry create networks for disease transmission as technicians move between different herds carrying equipment that can transport ticks and pathogens. The reproductive management practices that define modern cattle breeding often involve close contact with animals while using procedures that can facilitate disease transmission. Genetic improvement programs become pathways for pathogen dispersal. Agricultural cooperatives and farm supply stores serve rural communities that often have high tick population densities while providing minimal education about tick-borne disease prevention. Farmers and ranchers who gather at these facilities to purchase supplies and share information often lack current knowledge about disease prevention strategies. The social networks that support rural agriculture become disease transmission networks. Rural healthcare systems often struggle to provide adequate diagnosis and treatment for tick-borne diseases, as medical facilities in agricultural areas may lack the specialized knowledge and diagnostic capabilities needed to identify and treat these conditions effectively. Patients in rural areas may travel long distances to reach healthcare providers who understand tick-borne disease management, delaying treatment and worsening outcomes. The agricultural workforce that maintains rural America often consists of seasonal and migrant workers who lack access to healthcare and education about tick-borne disease prevention. These workers spend extended periods in agricultural environments with high tick populations while having minimal resources for disease prevention or treatment. Your descendants exploit the vulnerability of agricultural labor systems. Farm equipment dealers and agricultural machinery operations create networks for tick dispersal as equipment moves between different farms and regions for sales, service, and seasonal work. Combines and tractors and other farm machinery can transport questing ticks across vast agricultural areas, while equipment operators focus on mechanical operations rather than biological hazards. The agricultural economy becomes a distribution system for your offspring. Seed and fertilizer distribution networks that serve agricultural areas often operate in rural environments with high tick populations while providing minimal education about disease prevention to their customers and employees. Agricultural input suppliers who work in rural areas face ongoing exposure to tick populations while focusing on crop production support rather than health protection. The precision agriculture movement that uses GPS technology and data analysis to optimize crop production often requires farm workers to spend extended periods in fields and agricultural areas where tick populations are abundant. Technology adoption in agriculture sometimes increases human exposure to biological hazards while pursuing productivity improvements. Your descendants adapt to technological changes in agricultural practices. Organic certification programs that prohibit pesticide use on agricultural properties often create conditions that favor tick population growth while requiring inspectors and certification agents to spend time in areas with high tick densities. The environmental benefits of organic agriculture sometimes conflict with human health protection needs, creating complex management challenges for sustainable farming operations. Agricultural research stations and extension facilities often become centers for tick population establishment as researchers and extension agents work in experimental plots and demonstration areas that provide ideal tick habitat. The scientific infrastructure that supports agricultural development creates opportunities for tick host encounters while focusing on crop and livestock improvement rather than disease prevention. University agricultural programs expose students to tick populations during hands-on learning experiences in laboratories, greenhouses, and field research sites. Agricultural education that emphasizes practical experience often involves activities that increase tick exposure, while students focus on learning agricultural techniques rather than personal protection. The next generation of agricultural professionals acquires tick-borne diseases during their educational training. The 4-H and FFA programs that introduce young people to agricultural careers often involve activities that create high levels of tick exposure, while participants focus on animal projects and agricultural learning rather than disease prevention. Youth agricultural programs become pathways for disease transmission to rural children and teenagers who may lack adequate knowledge about tick-borne disease risks. Agricultural trade, shows, and farm equipment exhibitions bring together farmers, ranchers, and agricultural professionals from wide geographic areas in venues that often provide ideal tick habitat. These events can create opportunities for tick dispersal between different agricultural regions while focusing attention on technology and production rather than health protection. Your descendants exploit the social and commercial networks that support modern agriculture. The hunting lease industry that provides recreational hunting opportunities on agricultural and forest lands creates interfaces between urban hunters and rural tick populations. Hunters who purchase access to private lands often lack familiarity with local tick-borne disease risks while spending extended periods in prime tick habitat. The commercialization of hunting creates new pathways for disease transmission between urban and rural populations. Outfitters and hunting guides who work with clients from different geographic areas often serve as vectors for tick dispersal while focusing on providing successful hunting experiences rather than health protection. Professional hunting services create networks that can rapidly spread tick populations and disease strains across wide geographic areas as guides and clients move between different hunting locations. The hunting dog industry creates specialized networks for tick dispersal as trained hunting dogs move between different properties and hunting areas carrying tick populations on their coats. Dog training facilities, hunting dog competitions, and breeding operations provide opportunities for tick transfer between animals from different regions. Your descendants exploit the mobility and social nature of hunting dog activities. Taxidermy operations that process game animals from multiple hunting areas often become concentration points for tick populations as ticks drop off animals during the processing period. Taxidermists and their employees face ongoing exposure to tick populations from across their service areas while focusing on specimen preparation rather than personal protection. The preservation of hunting memories becomes a pathway for disease transmission. Meat processing facilities that handle wild game create opportunities for tick exposure among workers who process animals that may carry heavy tick loads from natural habitats. Wild game processing often involves less systematic inspection and cleaning procedures than commercial livestock processing, creating conditions that favor tick survival and worker exposure. Your descendants exploit the differences between commercial and wild game processing. The outdoor education industry has expanded to include wilderness therapy programs, outdoor leadership courses, and adventure education experiences that bring participants into extended contact with tick populations. These programs often emphasize personal challenge and connection with nature while providing minimal education about biological hazards. Participants focused on personal growth and outdoor skills development often neglect basic disease prevention measures. Corporate team building activities that utilize outdoor settings and adventure courses expose business professionals to tick populations while they focus on leadership development and team dynamics rather than health protection. The outdoor adventure industry that serves corporate clients often operates in natural settings with high tick populations while emphasizing experience rather than safety education. Military training exercises conducted in natural environments expose service members to tick populations while they focus on combat readiness and tactical skills rather than disease prevention. The realistic training conditions that prepare military personnel for deployment often include exposure to biological hazards that can affect force readiness and operational effectiveness. Your descendants become part of the environmental challenges that military forces must overcome. Law enforcement training academies that include outdoor tactical exercises and pursuit training often expose officers to tick populations while they focus on developing law enforcement skills. Police and sheriff's departments that operate in rural areas face ongoing exposure to tick-borne diseases while performing their duties in natural and agricultural environments. The public safety mission requires officers to work in areas where your descendants are abundant. Search and rescue operations that respond to emergencies in natural areas expose volunteers and professional rescuers to tick populations while they focus on saving lives rather than personal protection. The urgency of rescue operations often overrides normal safety protocols, creating conditions that favor tick attachment and disease transmission. Your descendants exploit the humanitarian impulses that drive search and rescue activities. Emergency medical services in rural areas often respond to calls in natural environments where tick populations are abundant while focusing on patient care rather than personal protection. Paramedics and EMTs working in rural and wilderness areas face ongoing exposure to tick-borne diseases while providing critical healthcare services. The medical mission to preserve life conflicts with personal health protection needs. Firefighting operations in wildland areas expose firefighters to tick populations while they focus on fire suppression and public safety rather than disease prevention. The protective equipment designed for fire suppression often provides inadequate protection against tick attachment, while the physical demands of firefighting make comprehensive tick prevention measures difficult to implement. Your descendants survive in areas where human activities create extreme environmental conditions. Utility companies that maintain power lines and communication infrastructure in rural and natural areas expose workers to tick populations while they focus on maintaining essential services rather than personal protection. Electrical workers, telephone technicians, and cable installers who work in areas with high tick populations often lack adequate education about disease prevention while performing duties that require extended periods in tick habitat. The renewable energy industry that constructs wind farms and solar installations in rural areas often locates facilities in environments with high tick populations while exposing construction and maintenance workers to disease transmission risks. Green energy development sometimes creates new interfaces between human activity and tick habitat while focusing on environmental benefits rather than occupational health protection. Pipeline construction and maintenance operations that cross rural and natural areas expose workers to tick populations across vast geographic territories. The linear nature of pipeline infrastructure creates corridors for tick dispersal while providing ongoing exposure opportunities for maintenance crews. Your descendants use utility corridors as highways for population expansion and genetic exchange. Surveying and engineering firms that work on rural development projects often expose employees to tick populations while they focus on data collection and project planning rather than health protection. Land surveyors, environmental consultants, and civil engineers working in natural areas face repeated exposure to tick-borne diseases while performing professional duties that require extended periods in tick habitat. The telecommunications industry that maintains cell towers and communication networks in rural areas creates ongoing exposure opportunities for technicians who must access facilities located in natural environments. Tower climbers and communication technicians often work in areas with high tick populations while focusing on equipment maintenance rather than personal protection. Communication infrastructure becomes part of the landscape where your descendants thrive. Transportation infrastructure maintenance exposes highway crews, bridge inspectors, and railway workers to tick populations while they focus on maintaining critical transportation systems. The rights of way that support transportation networks often provide ideal tick habitat while requiring ongoing human maintenance activities. Your descendants establish populations along transportation corridors that span entire continents. The logistics industry that moves goods through rural areas often exposes truck drivers, delivery personnel, and freight handlers to tick populations during loading, unloading, and maintenance activities. Rest areas, truck stops, and freight terminals located in rural environments provide opportunities for tick attachment while drivers focus on schedule demands rather than health protection. Commercial transportation becomes a vector for tick dispersal. Border patrol and customs enforcement activities in rural areas expose federal agents to tick populations while they focus on immigration and smuggling enforcement rather than disease prevention. The remote locations where border security operations occur often coincide with prime tick habitat, creating occupational health challenges for law enforcement personnel. Your descendants thrive in the borderlands where human activity intersects with natural environments. Immigration patterns that bring people through rural areas with high tick populations create opportunities for disease transmission among vulnerable populations who may lack access to health care or education about tick-borne disease prevention. Undocumented immigrants who travel through natural areas to avoid detection often acquire tick-borne diseases while having minimal resources for treatment. Your descendants exploit the vulnerabilities created by immigration policies. The disaster response industry that provides emergency services during natural disasters often operates in environments where tick populations have been disturbed or concentrated by flooding, wind damage, or other catastrophic events. Emergency responders, cleanup crews, and reconstruction workers face elevated exposure risks while focusing on disaster recovery rather than personal protection. Natural disasters create ideal conditions for tick population explosions and disease transmission. Insurance adjusters and damage assessment teams that investigate disaster impacts often work in affected areas where tick populations may be concentrated or displaced by catastrophic events. The documentation and evaluation activities required for disaster response bring professionals into contact with disturbed ecosystems where normal tick behavior patterns may be altered. Your descendants adapt to the environmental chaos created by natural disasters. Construction industries that build in rural and suburban areas often expose workers to tick populations while they focus on project completion rather than health protection. Home builders, road construction crews, and commercial developers working in areas being converted from natural habitat to human use encounter tick populations that are being displaced by development activities. Your descendants exploit the ecological disruption created by construction projects. Real estate development activities that convert natural areas to residential and commercial use often expose workers and future residents to established tick populations while focusing on economic development rather than public health protection. Land clearing, site preparation, and infrastructure installation bring humans into direct contact with existing tick habitat. Your descendants persist in developed areas long after construction is complete. The property management industry that maintains residential and commercial properties in areas with tick populations often exposes maintenance workers to disease transmission risks while they focus on property upkeep rather than personal protection. Landscaping crews, building maintenance technicians, and groundskeeping staff who work in areas with established tick populations face ongoing exposure while performing routine duties. Pest control companies that provide services in areas with tick populations often face occupational exposure while focusing on controlling other pest species rather than comprehensive tick management. Exterminators and pest control technicians who work in residential and commercial properties may encounter tick populations while treating for ants, termites, and other pests. The pest control industry becomes part of the ecosystem where your descendants operate. Your individual story of emergence, questing, feeding, and reproduction has multiplied into millions of similar narratives playing out across every continent where suitable hosts exist. The brief life you completed in a single forest ecosystem has become the template for a global biological phenomenon that affects human health, agricultural productivity, and ecosystem dynamics on an unprecedented scale. The diseases you collected during your feeding sessions continue to circulate through expanding tick populations, maintained by the constant cycle of reproduction and host-to-host transmission that defines tick success. The pathogens that flowed through your salivary glands during feeding have evolved and diversified, but they remain essentially the same biological weapons that made your life possible and your death meaningful. Your genetic contribution to the vast network of tick populations now spans continents and climate zones, carried by descendants that have adapted to environments ranging from Arctic tundra to tropical rainforests. The evolutionary strategies that allowed you to survive and reproduce in your forest habitat continue to prove effective in radically different ecosystems, demonstrating the fundamental biological principles that govern parasitic success. The cycle of patient questing, aggressive attachment, and efficient disease transmission that characterized your existence continues with mechanical precision through countless generations of your offspring. Each individual tick that emerges from an egg today carries within its genetic code the accumulated wisdom of millions of years of parasitic evolution, including the specific adaptations that made your life successful. Your death beneath that pile of leaves, after completing your reproductive mission, was indeed a transformation rather than an ending. The nutrients from your body fed the soil organisms that nourish the plants your descendants use for questing, while your genetic material became the blueprint for tick populations that now influence disease ecology on a global scale. The diseases you helped maintain and transmit continue to challenge human medicine, veterinary science, and public health systems worldwide, creating ongoing evidence of the far-reaching consequences of successful parasitic reproduction. Every case of Lyme disease, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, or tick-borne encephalitis diagnosed today can potentially trace its origins back to ticks like you who collected and maintained these pathogens through successful feeding and reproduction. The forest where your story unfolded continues to support new generations of ticks, but your influence now extends far beyond that single ecosystem. Urban parks, suburban lawns, agricultural fields, and even indoor environments now host tick populations that carry fragments of your genetic legacy, spreading the biological strategies that made your existence possible into every corner of the human-dominated world. The ancient biological warfare between parasites and hosts that defined your life continues to evolve and intensify, driven by the same evolutionary forces that shaped your own survival and reproductive success. Your descendants face technological and medical interventions that didn't exist during your era, but they adapt with the same evolutionary flexibility that allowed you to exploit your forest ecosystem effectively. The patient determination that characterized your questing behavior continues to define tick success in rapidly changing environments. As your offspring wait with infinite patience for opportunities to continue the parasitic cycle that has proven successful for millions of years, their persistence ensures that your genetic legacy will continue to influence host parasite relationships and disease ecology for generations to come. The story that began with your hatching from a tiny egg has become one of evolution's most enduring success stories, a biological system so effective at parasitic exploitation that it continues to thrive despite intensive human efforts to control it. Your brief life of questing, feeding, and reproducing achieved exactly what evolution designed it to achieve: the continuation of your genetic lineage and the perpetuation of the ancient strategies that make ticks among the most successful parasites on Earth. In the end, your individual existence was both unique and utterly representative of tick success, one life among billions that collectively demonstrate the power of evolutionary adaptation and the persistence of biological systems that have proven their effectiveness over millions of years. The cycle continues, driven by the same imperatives that motivated your own life, ensuring that the story of tick survival and reproduction will persist as long as suitable hosts exist to exploit. Your legacy lives on in every tick that successfully completes the cycle you once navigated, in every host that becomes infected with diseases you helped maintain, and in every new generation that emerges to continue the ancient biological drama of parasitic survival. The forest where you lived and died was just the beginning of a story that now spans the globe, carried forward by descendants who inherit both your genes and your role in one of nature's most successful biological strategies. Here you can find the next video. Until then, see you soon.